Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Montell Ferguson. I've been invited here to talk about my journey of my mental health and my experience of having a mental health condition. It's challenging to decide what to share from my whole life in such a short time frame. We have about an hour, but this presentation will last about 30 minutes or so. But I'll share key moments from my life that will hopefully build a picture in your mind that you'll be able to extract helpful insight from. I'm not here to persuade you of anything. I'm not here to convince you of anything. Some of the things that I might say might be contradictory, they might be paradoxical, or might also challenge what you're taught here. But I'm just here to share my experiential truth as information and my integrated understanding of my life experience. You're free, of course, to interpret this presentation how you wish or how you're able to. Some of you might be inspired, some of you might be triggered, and if anything, I hope you are just entertained for a little bit. You'll also see this thing pop up as an attempt to lighten some of the intensity of the things that I discuss. So I think we can get into it. So what I'm going to talk about today are as follows, but not really in any particular order. So my experience of life so far with having or experiencing a health condition, how it's affected my life, my journey of seeking and receiving support, my ongoing journey of recovery and what that looks like for me, also how it's impacted my life positively, and the evolution of myself and my identity in the process. So as mentioned prior, some of the information might be triggering and sensitive, and if at any point you feel like you don't want to listen to it or you don't want to be in the room anymore, that is okay, you're welcome to leave. And also if you don't want to pay direct eye contact or you just want to listen in with your ears, that is absolutely fine. And at the end, so I'll mostly share information, and then at the end there'll be space for you to ask any questions if you have any. So we're going to start with a question, and the purpose of this question is just to see what comes to mind. It's a rhetorical question, and it's just for you to see your first and second impressions. So the question is, what is the title for this chapter of your life? And you could also see it as what is the title for the chapter of your life that you've just come out of? What chapter are you going into? And do you feel like you're the creator of that chapter, or do you feel like you're receiving that? And how much control do you have over these things? So the purpose of this question is just to prime your mind to be reflective of yourself and life as I share details of mine. So who am I to be asking questions about what chapter of your life that you're in? So I will begin. So as mentioned, my name is Montell. I was born and raised in Bristol. I studied sport and exercise science at University of Gloucestershire for a time. I experienced emotional intensity, and as the American classification, they might call it borderline personality disorder. And I've also heard it described as emotional unstable personality disorder. And for that reason, I would technically qualify as a service user because I've engaged with the health services. I've done a Myers-Briggs personality test in the past, if you know what that is, and I came up as an INFJ, if that means anything to you. And I currently work part-time as a peer support worker. So essentially, I support people that are going through the health services journey, and I sometimes offer one-to-one sessions. I also help facilitate therapeutic groups and offer psychoeducation for people that are essentially going through the journey that I went through myself. Outside of that, I also like to do creative media and filmmaking and anything that's just creative really. I like to essentially capture the things in the world that bring people together. I also am a fan of holistic therapies, so I have practiced energy healing. People call me a guide or a mystic, and again, it's just for me to really explore myself. But also people have described me as someone that's focused, determined, calm, compassionate, logical, intuitive, paradoxical, intense, strange, sensitive, crazy, narcissistic, and peaceful. But I like to find my balance between these contrasting aspects of myself. So some more information about me, my passions and hobbies. I like problem solving and finding effective solutions to my problems. I like pursuing whatever excites and empowers me in life. I currently train Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and again, that's a lot of problem solving that I'm having to manage. I also like to guide and empower others, and I like to be creative and expressive. I like to travel. I have a crazy 1,350-day Duolingo streak. Yeah, I know I've got problems. But again, I really like sports, and I like to deepen my spiritual connection to life. And I like to know myself and life with a broader perspective. Again, I'm just someone that's always curious and passionate about discovering what's going on in this world, who I am and why I'm here and what my purpose is. Again, I wasn't always like that, or this wasn't always what I would do. I had to discover these things. And again, as someone, as I said, someone that wants to explore and expand on my knowledge and understanding of life, there's an aspect of myself that hadn't been thoroughly explored, and that was my intense emotional state of being that I had neglected for a long time. I call it that now, but at one point it was like an obscure, abstract, separate part of myself that I wasn't inclusive of in my reality. So, in terms of like emotional intensity, in the past, I recognized what that looked like for me, and I'm going to break down my experience of emotional intensity before I talk more about my journey. So, more specifically in context of emotional intensity, I would experience that as like a really narrow window of tolerance. I could become very irritable and agitated very quickly, and I'd experience rapid shifting moods, and also experience like long episodes of a low mood. And again, my identity and how I perceive myself would be quite unstable, and I could become hypersensitive to the things around me and experience strong physiological reactions in terms of my body temperature would rise, and I'd feel like I'm about to explode, you could say. And again, that would also manifest in my relationships in terms of they could become quite unstable. There would be like a lot of push-pull dynamics and things like that. And again, just unable to maintain secure connections in a way. I would say I was quite an anxious and avoidant person. And I'd say I still am somewhat to this day, but I'm managing a lot better. Some of the symptoms that would manifest as the more common ones, and again, these are typical things that people might experience, but for me, these are things that I recognize over time: becoming depressed and feeling a lot of despair towards life in general, and having a lot of anxiety and avoidance towards doing things that I know would encourage me to thrive. I'd also have a lot of anger and frustration, and again, I'd say I had a very short fuse towards things, and I've learned how to extend that now with time, but for a long time that was very, very short. And also, again, just lots of different things that are very common for people to experience. Sometimes it would be like all in one go, and other times it would just be a select few of them. But I like to say it was like a cocktail of confusion and challenge that I couldn't really manage, and yeah, it would just manifest as certain behaviors as well. And some of those behaviors would be like withdrawal and isolation. There are times when in the past I would externalize and I would like have a fit of rage, and I'm not proud to say, but I fought many inanimate objects and I've punched many walls, and that's never really resolved any situations. And the opposite side of that is where I'd withdraw and I would isolate and I would internalize all of my challenges. So I didn't know how to direct my emotion. I could become self-destructive and reckless, and I didn't really care about the consequences of my actions. I'd sabotage myself because I felt like I deserved that, and I'd suppress myself emotionally, and I would indulge in ways that were very careless because, again, I didn't really have any self-worth or value, and I didn't really think about the outcomes of that. But yeah, I would overreact, and I was unable to really perceive situations for how they were. So I'll share some of the challenges and triggers and disturbances of what can make me feel that way. And again, this is very normal. Most people might feel this. So again, like abusive language, when people use unfriendly tones, just generally being like an unpleasant person. And again, this is not to say like I'm not guilty of these things, but when you might have been in an environment where that was normal or it's accepted, or someone, for like myself, where I hadn't, I don't know, set the standard of how I want to be treated, you would accept a lot of these things. So no surprise that these things would set me off and, light my fuse. And again, when people interfere with me pursuing my goals and distract me from what I want to do in life, it'd get me upset and get me frustrated. When people would manipulate me and pressure me into doing things in terms of like, having that sense of urgency towards me. I'm a person that likes to be calm and collected and make grounded decisions. But for a long time, I didn't really give myself that space and permission to do that. And again, when people would criticize me in unhelpful ways, and another interesting one is like future planning. So for a long time, I would say like, if someone planned or asked me to do something in a week or two, I say, ask me on the day because I'm not sure how I would feel. And that's not very practical, because for something like this, I need to have prior notice and I need to commit to being here. So it's important for me to be able to kind of remain in a balanced state to be able to actually show up on that day. So some of the simple things that I would struggle with. Personally, as mentioned, I can be very self-destructive. Sometimes my hygiene would decline. I'm a person that typically likes to really dress and present in a way that reflects the kind of person I am. But during my really dark and difficult times, I've definitely like not bathed for a couple of days. I'm not proud to say that, but that was the reality of my mental state at the time. And I could become aggressive towards, like when I say myself, as in like punching walls, that type of stuff. And my ability to make grounded, coherent decisions was just out of the window or not there completely. And I didn't really meet my needs, specifically like health related. Sometimes I wouldn't eat and do things like that. And if you think of like the hierarchy of needs, it could be like I didn't really have all of that in place. It was just not really considered. But again, for a long time that was normal, and I didn't really know how to communicate what I was feeling interpersonally with people, and my ability to maintain secure relationships and feel, at peace within my relationships was not a thing for a long time. And again, I could be aggressive and dismissive towards people and then be withdrawn. And my perception of how people present to me was essentially distorted through my own way of perceiving and how I was looking at the world. And again, some of the things that I would also have struggles with is exercise. Like I love to do sports and I love to do exercise. And when I'm experiencing like more challenging times, I wouldn't do those things. And that, again, for me, shows me that my mental and emotional state has kind of deteriorated. Again, I wouldn't eat for periods of time. I wouldn't experience the pleasures and joy of life that we're here to experience. And I wouldn't suppress or neglect myself from being able to just enjoy life for what it is. Again, I wouldn't cook, even though I know how to. I wouldn't socialize. And again, I would just essentially neglect all of my responsibilities and my duties because, again, I didn't really care or I didn't understand and really think about the consequences of what that had on me. So now I'm going to add some more personal context by talking about my childhood development. So in my early years, so like primary school times, I lived between my parents' house. I actually have 4 brothers and 8 sisters, so you can understand my parents' attention might be a bit divided. And as a sensitive young person, again, like what I needed now and the things I've given myself as an adult, I don't think my parents or like the school environment that I was in could have given that to me. So I understand there's no blame or there's no blame to delegate to anyone. It's just understanding that they did what they could with the resources and understanding they had of themselves and life at the time. But I was always quite a bright student in primary school. I remember teachers always saying like Montell has no issues with learning, but for me it was just being in the classroom environment was challenging for me. And as mentioned, I was unable to receive the special care and attention I needed that would encourage me to thrive and be my best self. And I never really felt grounded and secure throughout my childhood. Although I was always provided for in terms of like my material needs, there are other needs more emotionally that I didn't feel like that were being met. But again, as mentioned, that's not to assign blame. It's just what was the circumstance I was in and the cards I was dealt by life. So I was always quick to become angry and withdrawn, especially from criticism. That was something that would always grind my gears and press my buttons. And I struggled to communicate what I was feeling despite I knew something was off. And again, that was quite challenging to even understand and navigate within itself. And I had very little self-confidence and self-worth, despite knowing that I had a lot of potential. And that was more confusing and disempowering for me. And I was always labeled angry, short-tempered, sensitive, and mad because of my behaviors. And as a young person who, again, would essentially trust their caregivers to empower them, with words of affirmation that are more positive, when I would receive information like that as a young person, it's just going to be absorbed by my subconscious and I'm going to accept that as truth. But again, this is not to say that it was all bad and it was all negative. I'd say I always felt loved and supported, but there were certain things around like my needs that weren't met, I would say. But I also understand like now with hindsight, it was also the recipe for me to become who I am today. So into my adolescent years, my sensitivity and emotional intensity only increased, and that reflected in my behavior. And I'd say in secondary school, that was when I really and truly first felt like the first depth of depression, which is probably quite normal as well. But again, I had really poor sleep quality. I was typically very overstimulated, and I didn't really have like a bedtime routine. And in the morning, like I didn't have, again, sleep hygiene that was not really there. And again, I was typically quite withdrawn, from the things that I enjoyed doing in life. I wasn't necessarily a bad student. I just felt like I was misunderstood and disconnected. And again, just being in that classroom environment at that time in my life, that was just very challenging for me. And that was very noticeable at times. I'd say I was very disruptive and I struggled to function in the classroom. And again, yeah, I wasn't naughty. I was just, crying out for help, you could say, but I didn't know how to verbalize that. And I'd say I missed large amounts of school during the age of 14 to 16, so like year 9 through to year 11, just because I didn't want to be there. And again, it's not that I couldn't do the work, I just couldn't be in that space. So I was diagnosed as depressed and referred to counseling. And again, at that time, I didn't really have any, I had a lot of resistance to going because I didn't really accept it. And I didn't really identify with being a depressed person. As a 15-year-old, what does that even mean? And at that time in the world, I didn't even understand what that meant. So yeah, it was just difficult for me to open up and receive what they were offering because I didn't really understand what situation I was in. But I knew I didn't like that situation I was in or what I was feeling. But I never really spoke about it with my friends because how would I bring that conversation up? Again, we would typically go into a youth club, playing football and, just doing things to enjoy our lives. I wasn't really going to talk about feeling down and feeling low. So I left school with very little qualifications. But again, this is just making context for this seminar. There was still a lot of very valuable experiences from school years, and I look back very, very fondly. But the important thing to note was I never really addressed emotional intensity and the depression that I was feeling at that time. And again, I call it that here now, I call it that, but that's how I understood it then. But now I kind of understand it in a bit of a different light. So into my early adulthood, I found some purpose in sports coaching. I was a natural leader, I was innovative, I was also observant, and I learned how to connect with people. Again, it just seemed to come natural to me. It seemed to be my path, it seemed to be my calling. And yeah, I really enjoyed that at a time. It seemed to help me feel really grounded. And I went back into education, I did BTEC Sport, I got a triple distinction star. So I was proving to myself, of course I can do this work. I'm not stupid, I am certainly a bright person, but I kind of have to have the right motivation and things around me to get the best out of myself. So I won awards as well. I became really independent and I functioned really well. I was clear and I was focused. I had the charisma, I had the personality, I had the ego, and I definitely looked happy on the outside. But I would say that I still didn't really have any emotional connection to myself. I had no understanding of the underlying conditions that were affecting me. I kind of had just put it in a box and ignored it for a long time. And also, I used to say, if I can't see it or touch it, it's not real, or I don't feel emotions. And again, that's a very bold statement to make for someone who now in the present would say I'm a very much emotional person. But it just goes to show the disconnect that I was living in for a long time. So continuing my early adulthood, I went into University of Gloucestershire and I slowly lost momentum. Again, I enjoyed my time there, but the denial of what I would feel in my internal world was unsustainable. And I functioned really well during the first year. But then after the highs of year 2 varsity and my declining grades, I slowly descended into this dark space and I wasn't leaving my room. And I eventually stopped going to football, and people that know me know that if I'm not doing sports, then there's something wrong. And I would wander the streets, I wouldn't eat, I would starve myself for days. And I think back to at that time, when I was a mentor or when I was doing coaching for young people, if they were saying or they were experiencing things like that, or I had seen them doing things like that, I would encourage them to get help. But when I was in it and I was experiencing it, it's a very, very different thing, and it's really hard to reach out. And again, there's also the being a man and the culture I'm from, and just talking about mental health and things like that, that was its own battle in itself as well. So again, I just wanted to be angry and I wanted to feel something. And again, I remember for a time I reached out to Samaritans via email because I couldn't formulate my thoughts into words that I could share with people. So it was a bit helpful to write things down for a time. But again, it didn't really resolve anything or bring any peace or conclusion. And enough people that I noticed that I wasn't myself, and I began to solely identify with the symptoms of my condition in terms of, for a long time, I would say I didn't acknowledge it. And then there was a time where I was like, okay, I keep getting depressed. Maybe I'm just this depressed guy. And again, I like to say that I returned home and enjoyed the last of my limited view of life. So in autumn 2018, depression became really intense. I was in a really, really low and dark space, and I just desired a massive change because this cycle kept coming around and I wanted to understand it more, because if it's going to keep coming around, I need to honor it and I need to respect it. So I changed my diet in terms of I just stopped eating meat and I cut out, junk food and things like that. Again, I've been on a whole journey since then. My diet is a lot more intuitive and conscious. So, I again, I eat in a way that encourages me to thrive, but I had to make certain changes just as an action to be the catalyst for other changes that needed to happen. I do like cold showers, and again, like I'm not a fan of it, but I like how I feel afterwards, so I understand the importance of going beyond my comfort zone and challenging myself, and just taking those little steps that would lead to other steps. And again, I began to question everything. Again, growing up, my dad always used to say, like, there's no issue with asking questions. It's always good to ask questions. And again, some of the statements that I had made in the past, like I can't see it or feel it, it's not real, or I don't feel emotions, clearly I needed to go into that and understand that a little bit more. So I was willing to challenge myself. And again, like, I began to study Eastern philosophy and understand emotional intensity and the things that aren't visible, because those were aspects of myself that I hadn't really considered and I didn't want to consider and I wasn't inclusive of in my life. It's also worth mentioning that around that time, I had some profound transcendental spiritual experiences. And again, for me, that person that I grew up as and the person that I knew myself to be, that did not really fit into my worldview, but I have to include it in this because it is part of my journey and it's something that happened. Some people would describe it as a spiritual awakening. At that time, I did not fancy that language and I did not fancy those terms, but now I kind of understand, embrace, and accept what that could have been. And also, alongside that, for some reason, I would just get up in the morning at sunrise and I would meditate for about 30 minutes in the morning and 30 minutes in the evening. I don't do it like that now, but I needed to do that at that point because I just had that calling to do that and it felt natural to me. And I began to experience what I understand to be like an expanded sense of self. I remember Googling at the time, like depersonalization, I don't know who I am and, you know, what's my purpose, that type of thing. So again, like, felt like my identity was just kind of like shifting and I was kind of learning about my true personality that wanted to come to the surface. So yeah, over time, my perspective of life slowly changed. With hindsight now, with looking back, I'd say I subconsciously connected to the emotions that I desired to balance and integrate. And like anything in life, if you want to master something, you're going to have to revisit those challenges in full. It doesn't mean I would go back to the exact circumstance, but in terms of when I would face or when I'd feel certain emotions, I was willing to face it for what it is rather than ignore it and put it in a box and compartmentalize things. So around that time as well, I started a mentoring job doing off-site learning. I was working with young people that were outside of mainstream education. They were typically like SEND, so they had sometimes social, emotional, and mental health challenges. And again, that was really rewarding at that time because I was able to like connect with people or young people that often reflected the background that I came from. But also during that time, I also reflected and pondered on some questions. And again, it was like, because I was desiring change and like losing my sense of identity, something saw me as an opportunity for a fresh start in a way. So I asked myself, who am I and what story am I telling? And like, if you've explored Eastern philosophy, they do like self-inquiry and a constant exploration of the self and the psyche. And it's something that I still continuously do, but it was new to me at that time. I also asked, how great can life become? And I phrase it like that because I used to say, like, look how bad my life is and why is life so difficult? And, you know, I hate my life, that type of thing. And I realized that I could also declare the opposite. And, you know, how great can life become seemed to be like a bridge towards realizing the manifestation of what that might look like. At that time, it didn't feel that way, but that was the question that opened up the door and the pathway for me to realize the truth of that statement. I also asked myself, what can I make more room for in my life right now? Because again, there were a lot of things that I didn't have space for in my life in terms of emotional regulation and balance and being at peace. So I wanted to, you know, make space for those things to become natural in my life. So essentially, I was deliberately questioning my assumptions about myself and life so I could discover and embrace new beliefs, so I could have new experiences, and those experiences would change me, and then I could see who I would become or what I would become in the process. So as mentioned, I went back into mentoring. I was doing work with young people, and again, it's very familiar and triggering in a way because a lot of these young people were from, you know, similar backgrounds, and I could see like my former childlike self in a lot of these young people. So in a way, it was like, although I'm helping them, I'm helping my own inner child at the same time. And that was really valuable and really rewarding to be able to do that. I also started what I call at that time my dream job. I was working at Bristol City Football Club doing project coordination, and that was really fun while it lasted. But of course, shortly after, COVID happened. And yeah, I ended up leaving that job in September 2020, and that was emotionally painful. But with now, like looking back, I understand that I had kind of like started a journey, and you know, I needed to continue doing this work that I was doing. I wasn't done exploring and balancing these emotional aspects of myself. And also, even though it was difficult, I was also cultivating those inner skills to maintain that expanded perspective and avoid falling too deeply into that dark space again. I was essentially like learning more skills around emotional regulation and yeah, just doing self-knowledge and media and just anything that I wanted to do and enjoy. I like to say I was discovering who I am without the influence of society and people and the things around me, and getting to know me for me, and you know, just being that. And I essentially was building myself from the inside out. I was complementing my conditions and stacking fulfilling habits and feeling the compounding effect of that, and that felt really good to do. So 2021, I would say, was some of my worst emotional episodes, despite doing all of that work on myself at that time. I would become very withdrawn, depressed, angry, emotionally unstable. And again, at one point, I was expressing a lot of concerning behavior. I was screaming for help, not verbally, but like in the way that I was behaving. I felt a lot of despair and anger. And if I'm honest, I wanted to check out of this experience, if you know what I mean. And I felt like I deserved it. I again began to identify with that voice that was kind of like speaking to me in that way. Not that I was hearing voices in that sense, but that inner dialogue that felt quite distorted. And again, I had a lot of pride for being insightful and independent. And yeah, it was challenging for me to kind of challenge that voice within myself. So it's hard for me to reach out, and I'd rather suffer in silence. So after one particularly concerning episode, I did spend the night in the hospital. And I remember the nurses from the crisis team that came to talk to me on that day, I still couldn't really express how I was feeling towards them, towards like myself, and sharing it with them. I didn't know how to verbalize what I was feeling. And even to this day, again, it's not always easy, depending on the context. And I felt like I had tried everything because, again, I'd done a lot of work. I was working on myself. I was growing myself. And again, I kept hitting these lows, and it was just really, really deflating, I would say. So they realized that obviously I was making a good effort for myself. And then they referred me to the recovery team. And at that time in the world, in terms of like COVID and things like that, I knew I had to take it. It was also around 10 years to when I was initially referred to counseling. So I thought in my brain, like, I don't want it to be another 10 years, so I may as well just give it a go and just give it my best shot. And yeah, I think I was ready to give it all of my effort. And yeah, I just went into it with a lot of courage and resilience to just kind of get the most out of it. So around that time, I was pondering some more questions, and it wasn't like I specifically wrote this down, but when I look back, I understand this is what I was going through, what I was reflecting upon. So some of those questions were, do I have any beliefs about myself, the world, or life in general that are in conflict with my deeper knowing? What events have caused me to feel uneasy with life? And do I have any rules or promises to myself that I wouldn't break for anyone? And some of these questions kind of allude to that expanded sense of self that I was feeling that might have been in conflict with my societal beliefs, my cultural beliefs, and again, just things that I grew up and I was conditioned to know. A lot of the things that I was experiencing within myself was going well beyond that, and I needed to reconcile those differences within myself. And also the rules and promises thing, that's kind of alluding to like the boundaries that I had or hadn't set and upheld. You know, I say now, like, my inner peace is non-negotiable, and I'm able to verbally uphold that boundary. But also, when I'm not able to verbally uphold a boundary, sometimes Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu can be helpful in that way. That was a joke, by the way. So, as I mentioned, I was referred to have regular one-to-one sessions with a SCM practitioner within AWP. SCM is called Structured Clinical Management, and it's a type of dialectical behavioral therapy where I'd meet once every other week to basically go through a process of formulation where I kind of share details of my childhood as mentioned, and essentially pick out the themes of what was causing me to feel uneasy and conflict. and essentially to kind of establish or take the actions that would help me to bring peace and balance to those things within myself. So I'd also do a closed group that had psychoeducation and problem solving. And again, a lot of people in this group were in a similar client group. Like I was engaging with the services as someone that fit a particular group. I wasn't formally diagnosed, but I fit the client group. And I'm happy that I didn't have a diagnosis in that way. It was helpful in the sense of I could categorize a lot of those symptoms and I could put it in a box and say, I understand how I relate to that. But here now in the present, I wouldn't say I'm exactly one of those in that client group in a way. I wouldn't say I present so much as someone that would be referred now in the present. And also now in my work, I actually work in these teams now. So I actually get to deliver these therapeutic groups and it's very rewarding. But I was also doing the Bristol Wellbeing College workshops. Again, this was voluntary, I didn't have to do it. But at that time in the world where I had a bit more time on my hands, again, I wasn't working because I wasn't really able to. And also I had challenges with like my social situation, my housing. In a way, I had a lot of time and a lot of time to reflect and not much going on. So I thought it would be important to just invest all of my time and energy into my personal development. I remember I did the workshop Writing with Emotion, and they asked if we could write something from like an emotional place. And I remember when I put my pen to the paper, it was really difficult for me to like get that creative flow and get into the creative channel. And I remember I couldn't write from some of my emotions, but I almost started crying because I couldn't write. And that was actually really insightful because it made me realize that I still had a lot more work to do in terms of being able to connect with myself emotionally and express myself in a healthy way. So I also kind of explored shadow work and like the inner child type stuff and just really like what I like to describe re-raising myself as my own parent in a way and my own caregiver in a way that I would have liked to be cared for. But again, not to like assign blame or not be grateful for what I did experience, because I definitely hold a lot of healthy core memories from my time growing up. But again, I was processing, again, traumatic experiences that I had experienced, and I was just engaging with every opportunity that could help, although there was always huge resistance in the sense of every day feels like day one, it never feels easier, it never gets simpler, or, you know, it just always seems to be a challenge. But as you can see, a lot of the things I was doing around that, I was giving myself the strength and resilience to be able to show up. That was the important part of the journey. And even to this day, like doing this type of thing, it's not easy by any means, but I feel better knowing that I've given it a go rather than not trying, you know? So I, over time, began to integrate new awareness. Again, I began to use holistic therapies, and as someone who, again, was not really a fan of that, and I would laugh or judge anyone that would do that type of stuff, I was kind of like allowing myself to explore that. And as I grew to know myself on a deeper level, I kind of understood that type of stuff really is attractive to me, and it helps me to feel at peace and grounded and maintain that emotional connection with myself. I started to practice energy healing, specifically in the form of Reiki. I trained to the level of Reiki master, not for any purpose of like offering anything to anyone, but more so just for me to connect with myself and also to be someone that can show up and hold space for people when I engage with them. I really just wanted to understand the spiritual aspects of life that I had completely ignored and neglected, and understand emotional energy in relation to the human body and chakra system. Although again, like I'm very much like my sports science background, I thoroughly like, you know, stand by that and believe in all of that and respect that. But there was also this, which again wasn't really accepted around me when in certain groups and environments. And again, it was quite a solitary journey for me to go through this process. But again, I just wanted to understand how emotional energy might manifest in physical and behavioral symptoms because of what I had been experiencing. And I was essentially releasing and integrating emotional energy, letting go of the dark and heavy feelings and integrating more positive and more lighter feelings that would help me to feel good. And I like to describe it as I brought union between the light and dark, the positive and negative, or the masculine and feminine aspects of myself, because quite often I was at either end of the spectrum and I never really learned how to be in that middle space. I started to creatively channel my vivid inner world through many different forms of expression, which I still do now to this day. I can write without crying, although sometimes it can get a bit emotional. And also, essentially just mastering the art of being a human in this world. So my ongoing recovery and the things that encourage me to thrive is, as mentioned, exercise. It helps me to feel grounded. It helps me to focus my mind. I like having practical and tangible tasks that I can work through and attempt to solve with different levels of success. I like to reflect a lot of the time. I'm very much like an introspective person, and I pick up a lot of, intuitive perceptions. And I like to practice meditation and journal a lot of what I experience internally. I like to say that journaling for me is like, imagine your mind as a multicolored ball of yarn, and you get that yarn and you completely untangle it and you color coordinate it and organize it in like a horizontal pattern. That is what journaling done for me. It allowed me to kind of untangle my internal mental space and enabled me to be able to basically organize my thoughts in a more organized stream, you could say. So again, creative expression helps me, and connection with my family and friends and having quality time. And when I say intimacy, I mean when you have a conversation with someone where, I might be speaking on this type of heavy topic, and it's a very deep conversation where we're having real connection and we're able to actually talk about things that are really challenging us, our burdens and our problems. And there's a type of intimacy in that, where you're actually connecting with someone on a level where they're able to express and bring to the surface what they might be feeling emotionally and mentally. Lots of rest, so I have a lot more, sleep hygiene in that sense. I have a nighttime routine, a morning routine. It's not perfect all the time, but typically I know how it makes me feel in a positive sense, so I try and respect that. And again, like breathing exercises, muscle relaxation. I like to go to the spa and get massages and just, again, be in my body in a way. And also just expanding my comfort zone, as mentioned, doing things that I don't like doing to encourage myself and remind myself that I can do the things that I don't feel like I'm capable of doing. And sometimes I don't get it right, but again, I still have the vulnerability to reach out and admit that I do need support at times. Although I have done a lot by myself, a lot of my journey was influenced by the people that supported me. And for me and what journey I went on, I understand now that for me, it's more about learning how to formulate and express my thoughts and my feelings in a way that I'm able to be able to, communicate in a healthy way and allow other people to receive that and feel safe in doing that. But yeah, I still regularly feel quite emotionally intense in various different ways. Typically, it's in a more like euphoric, happy state, but it can also be the opposite and polarizing type of feeling. But recognition is key, because when I'm in a very high mood, I could be up in the middle of the night listening to music bouncing off the walls. And then when I'm in like a really low mood, I'm just not going out and I'm staying by myself. So I like to stay in that middle zone where I can just be in the balance and in the flow and just surf through those feelings. But I'm always continuing to discover different facets of my being as time goes on. I pick up and put down various different things over time because, again, we're all growing and we're always changing. I tell this story here now over the last 5 years of my life, but the next 5 years of my life, I don't doubt is going to be very different. And again, I'll probably tell a different story at that time. But again, I'm now accepting that my efforts are enough. I'm able to kind of cruise through life in a healthier way. And when I feel like I'm not doing enough, sometimes my compassionate voice is what I need to turn to. So, over time, and as I prefer to be in a state of balance, I began to recognize the signs and symptoms of this, like the signs and symptoms of when I was out of balance and, when I was struggling. So personally, I'm a lot more self-empowered. I have the confidence and courage to pursue the things I'm interested in. I'm a lot calmer and at peace, and I can hold space for myself and others when I feel inclined. I have clarity of mind and emotional balance that I can turn to, and I can trust myself and I can bring together to make coherent decisions. And I'm able to be in a state of spiritual harmony as a result of that. And that allows me to be consistent in terms of working towards my goals and the things that are important to me. It also allows me to be resilient with challenging times as well. Interpersonally, I'm able to uphold those boundaries in a healthy way, and also working at maintaining stable and secure connections. It's not perfect all of the time, but again, it's an ongoing practice. And again, I always make mistakes and there's no problem with that. I'm a lot more attentive, and I'm able to be more embracing and accepting of the circumstances of life that, that get thrown at me, and I can manage that. and I can actually ask to receive support and offer support in a healthy way. In a way, it's like knowing when I can pour from my cup and knowing when I need to refill my cup. And I'm able to actually trust people and know that they have my best interests in heart. I can essentially, like, what's the word? Pick my relationships in a more healthy and conscious way. And in my behaviors, I'm a lot more expressive, assertive, and able to be in a state of focus and flow. And that enables me to be efficient in terms of working towards my goals and objectives. And also, I'm able to thrive. And I feel a sense of passion for life now. And also, interestingly, I feel quite detached from all of it. So you'll be pleased to know we're near the end. So for a long time, I was unconsciously experiencing life. And, you know, I could say I had a degree of understanding of what's going on, but I couldn't really connect the dots. And some just don't connect either. And I don't try and make things fit in boxes where they're not supposed to. And I was never really out of touch of reality. I was always in the room, but I just wasn't present with what was going on a lot of the time. And again, I would experience dissociation and a loss of identity in that process. But again, I like to say I released myself from the grip of beliefs that no longer serve me. As mentioned, you know, I know myself in relation to me, and, you know, it doesn't matter whether I'm here or anywhere in the world. I know who I am, I know what I stand for, I know what I live by, and that is very secure and grounding for me. But sometimes accessing what I describe as resonant information helped. So by that I mean, although I respect and of course read a lot and read information from like accredited and reputable backgrounds, sometimes it'll be like a person suggests that I listen to or read something that doesn't follow a particular model, and, you know, it seems to resonate with me where I'm at that time, and I take it with a grain of salt, I apply it, and then I see the truth of that. And some information came from inner knowing and proved itself to be true. By that, I mean, there's times when I've been in meditation and I get like intuition and insight that no one's particularly told me, but I know it to be true. And then over time, I kind of allow that truth to be manifest, to present itself back to me and be reflected to me. And I understand that not all information and knowledge just comes from external information. Within ourselves, we have a wealth of resource and knowledge, and if we're able to tap into that, we can actually live better lives. But also, as I grow, I see the negative experiences caused by a lot of my old beliefs in a more positive light, and I say like they're quite neutral now. And I don't really pass judgment towards others' choices, but I'll definitely stand in my power and embody my preference if I'm challenged. So again, I prefer to live in a way that encourages me to thrive. I choose to tell an empowering story in this world because that will invite others to do the same whenever they're ready. And as mentioned earlier, my inner peace is a non-negotiable. And this journey has really required absolute surrender and commitment to the unknown. In a way, if past me knew that I was going to go on this journey and have this kind of path and become who I am today, I would have not started to walk this journey. And I describe it as like, I took many different steps and I could only see the step in front of me at a time, although there was a complete staircase, or you could say a mountain of a journey that I had to go on. But not only did surrender break down my old beliefs, I'm also proud of the person that I've become in the process, and it's really solidified my knowing of a greater guiding power and force. So, what is recovery? And again, recovery is the language that's typically used, but I like to substitute that word with freedom or sovereignty. So recovery is embarking on a journey of self-discovery and mastery. It's committing to and embracing all aspects of yourself and life. It's the courage and willingness to engage with support that's being provided to you. And it's also taking about accountability for what you have control of. As I understand now with time, I grew up in an environment, and again, there's like intergenerational trauma. I inherited DNA that has positive and negative gene expressions, and there's no blame to be had because, you know, this is the body I'm in, but it is also for me to be accountable and responsible for me to manage those things that are more challenging so the trauma isn't passed down the line to the next generations that continue to come along. It's also to respond and react where possible, because I try and be grounded and calm as much as I can, but people still challenge me. And it's also finding your balance and staying in that balance as you continue to grow and expand. It's also to let your inner child be free. And for those of you who are a bit spiritual in this space, it's to balance and harmonize the discordant patterns in your chakras and in your aura. So we're going to finish off where we started with the rhetorical questions or a couple of questions so you can ponder these in your own time. What is the title for this chapter of your life? Who are you and what is your story? And what can you make more room for in your life right now? For some of you, it might be rest. For some of you, it might be to study. But you can reflect on that in your own time and space. So just to finish off with a brief statement, life flows and unfolds in a spiral motion of ever-expanding cycles, and our story is always being written. There is no promise that life will get easier, and there's no promise that life will get better, but you can make promises to yourself. You can make a promise to yourself to be balanced, resilient, and resourceful, and to cultivate the courage and strength to live up to your potential. We are all figuring it out. We're putting the pieces of ourselves back together, and we're doing that together and helping each other do that too. So you'll be pleased to know we have arrived at the end. I appreciate you listening and being patient and being so attentive. I understand that this topic can be quite heavy and probably has triggered a bit of reflection. But I understand as well it might be difficult to know what to ask if you have any questions. So I've made it a little bit easier for you if you want to ask anything. But yeah, thank you again for your time. Oof. Sorry about the delay. That went on for a bit longer than expected. Damn. Thank you.